He's still a
So
lawyer,
that
but
I
I've
checked on the
practiced
Harrison
for
Ford
30
film, everything's
years.
still on hold.
35,
So, and I
right.
should tell you, I meant to bring the
Well, I
titles,
wanna
the two
mention,
titles
I know.
that are on our website from you
And what are you doing
that
now?
were kind of a vintage big band.
Oh,
Yeah, that
cool.
you would, if you told me the names, I would know what they were. But
Uh-huh,
and because I
right,
checked in with Art
That's
Ford,
pretty
and he
cool.
goes,
It's
no,
always
that's
good.
still,
It's always
they
nice to
were
have a song
temped
on
in,
the
that's
film.
still cool. I'm like, okay, because I'm seeing these guys, I like to tell them. I like to start getting some placements already. I mean, it's been, but a lot of stuff. I mean, and I even that indie band that you signed out of there as well, the biggest band that you've got.
All right, we're going to get the show on the road here.
Yeah, they were like on the cover of like papers, and they were performing out there. I mean, they were like.
He always loved music.
Well, they got a chase or a chase sapphire.
Hi, Deb.
Or something like
That's
that.
what it is.
Hi, Rick.
Fantastic. You've had good years.
Okay, let's roll it back there, Tavia. Good? All right. All right, welcome to the 12th Annual New Hampshire Film Festival. All right. A lot of you guys I can see have been here doing other stuff and films. That's awesome. Appreciate that. Last day of the festival, and we want to go out with a bang today. We got a couple great panels, a lot of good films lasting all day long. Please check them out. Welcome to everybody here and everybody who's going to be watching this online. How's it going out there? My name is Dan Hannon, one of the co-founders and organizers of the event. And right now, I just want to kick it to this great panel we have for you today, a discussion on music in film. And to take it away, well, first let me quickly thank our amazing sponsors who help us do this piece of the overall festival, Old Port Properties, and our technical team of AV Technik and Fuel Creative and Anchor Line, as well as Sperry Tents for the work they do to set the room for us. Really appreciate it. So without further ado, here is Bob Lord, CEO of PARMA Recording.
Thank you very much. Keep clapping, Rick. Thanks for coming out today. We really appreciate it. And I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. We have a great group of folks here today. To my left, we have Mason Daring, who is a composer and producer, songwriter, who has done such films as Prefontaine and Eight Men Out. In the middle is Suzanne Hilleary, the founder and president of WACBiz, a music licensing and supervision company. And her, I think, most impressive achievement was placing the song Smooth with Carlos Santana, not a mean feat. And all the way at the end of the panel is Jake Weinreb, and in the interest of full disclosure, he is my employee, so I do pay him and write his checks. I won't go too hard on you today, Jake, but Jake deals on a daily basis with contractual issues, small and large, and handles a lot of creative and business stuff for my company, PARMA. So it's a pleasure to have you guys here, and I'd like to take a minute and have each of you speak very briefly a little bit about your background and specifically what brought you into an area of what I would call functional music and functional usage of artistic creation in a synchronized capacity, not unlike a football team where you all sit there and you got to go towards a common goal. And then ask a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So, Mason, would you mind giving us a little bit of background on yourself and how you arrived at working on some of the films that you have, which are films that we're all familiar with and have seen and heard 1,000 times?
Well, I had a rather checkered past. I was an attorney for a while, and before that, or actually during that, I actually directed TV commercials for a living, which I enjoyed. And was thinking about becoming a filmmaker, but I worked my way through law school and college playing guitar, and was producing records for singer-songwriters in the Boston area, and by a fluke, a guy named John Sayles got in touch with me to ask me to be his lawyer for a film he was making out of his credit card called Return of the Secaucus 7, and I actually said no, because when someone asked me on his behalf, because you never make any money as a lawyer working for people that are trying to get films made. And then someone mentioned his name, and I said, yeah, that's funny, I just read a great book by a guy named John Sayles. And they said, well, it's the same guy. And I said, well, you know what, forget everything I just said, I'll hold his coat. And then his car broke down on the way to see me. I'm going through all this history just to explain how funny detours our lives take. And I'm a gearhead, and we went and worked on his car for a day in a parking lot in East Boston, and we became best friends. And then about a year after he made the film, he called me to do the music, because he was trying to finish it, as I said, he was writing for Roger Corman at the time. And so instead of being his lawyer, I became his composer, and the film made top 10 lists throughout the country, Time Magazine, LA Times, Boston Phoenix. Played for 6 months in Boston. And And then he asked me to be his lawyer and do music for his second film, Leanna, and I said, well, you know what, I'm pretty much done with this whole lawyer thing. I'll find you a lawyer, but I'd love to write the music. And then a few films later, you know, people from Los Angeles started calling, and then I had an agent, and I've done 73, 74 movies now, and about half of them theatrical, about half of them cable. And I owned a record company for a while that was a division of Rounder Record. I like the studio. I like to produce artists. And now I left Hollywood a few years ago to take care of some family members, and found out that I didn't miss it as much as I thought I would. And as I mentioned earlier, to the folks up here, you know, there are a lot of young people coming up. You'll notice when you see movies these days, you don't recognize the name of the composer as often as you used to. It's just so many hundreds of people doing it now out there. I enjoy teaching. I'm teaching at Berkeley. I'm going to Spain for them to teach next semester in Valencia. They have a master's program over there now. 1 day a week. If I don't do too much, I like it. I'm going to do another movie for John in a few weeks. So I've done, I don't know, 16 or 17 for John Sayles. But I've enjoyed the Hollywood stuff too. I mean, I just saw Wes Craven the other day. He's an old friend. I did a film for him, a non-genre movie for him. So I like the smorgasbord. I like big films. I like little films. I'm more comfortable with orchestra and live musicians and blues players than I am with electronics, which is a reason why it can be more difficult for people like me to find work, because it's an electronic world. And I don't resent that. I mean, I love to go to the movies, so if it works for the movie, I think that's fine. It's just, life is a series of unread manuals, and there are several I'm not planning on reading that have to do with various synthesizers. So sometimes I'm not as interested in keeping up with the latest sine wave, you know. But films have been very good to me. And I, you know, in closing, I'll just say, you know, what we do as composers is understand that films are not 2-hour music videos with regrettable dialogue. You know, it's our job to work with the collaboration with the great directors, and I've worked with some fabulous directors, and just not just John, but really Tony Goldwyn and Matt Williams and Don Roos, Peter Yates, just great directors. And the collaboration with these people is really what it's all about, and we get to do that. It's pretty neat. We get paid for it. Pretty strange. So it can be a lot of fun. I've been very lucky.
It sounds like a lot of your professional relationships have turned into personal relationships or started off as personal relationships. And I imagine that must inform the creative process that you go through when you're creating a score. Have there been a lot of circumstances of deep collaboration, and how deep does it go? Is it you know, how musical is it?
I once was going to play, I did this horrible Mickey Rourke Western once called Last Outlaw. And it was great fun, because I always wanted to do a movie of guys shooting each other off horses. And I went to play it for my agent. He said, I don't need to hear it. And I said, why don't you want to hear it? I think it's terrific. He said, it's not with you, it's not about the music. If you couldn't write music, you wouldn't be here. He said, from this moment on, your career is about relationships. And you got it. It is about that. It's about, and by the way, somebody called me not long ago to interview me about composers that have been fired, because we've all been fired. I replaced Elmer Bernstein twice, and the second time I replaced him, somebody replaced me, and the guy that replaced me got replaced. The fourth composer on that film actually got credited with the score. Which is a way of saying, and that was Robert Redford was the director, and it's a way of saying that sometimes you can't establish that relationship. Sometimes you can't get it working, and even though you try. When it does work, it's generally about leadership on the part of the director. I remember Peter Yates. He passed away a couple of years ago. He did Bullet and Breaking Away. He was an incredible director. And when I was working with him, he would call me up and just say, I just wanted you to know, I was listening to the music the other day, and it's fabulous. I really love what you're doing. And that was it, the end of the phone call. You would eat fire for this guy, you know. I mean, he would just, and John Sayles, if he wants a change, I can't wait to make it. So it's really about them leading and us trying to figure out how to give them what they want. It has to be intense, but I like to keep the drama up there on the screen. And it doesn't have to be musical. In fact, why would it be? If they said I really would prefer this as 16th note ostinato played on the violas, I'd think, well, who the hell needs me? You know, I'd rather they say I'd like it more purple. You know, it really, the whole thing is just too slow. I need everything faster. I like metaphors, but it's however you're going to speak to them, directors, he or she, they got to trust you, and they have to believe in you, and it's your job to make them.
I was working with a director once, and I was told that the piece that I gave to him was not right because 16th notes aren't in right now.
Really?
It was so wrong
Really?
on so
They're
many
out
levels.
now?
Yeah, yeah.
That's good to know. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the kind of stuff I'm always late getting that word, you know?
Oh, man. So, Suzanne, I know that your commitment to your artists, having worked with you before in the past, is deep and profound, and I think that you look at your artist roster and the people that you represent as being very much a family of folks. And how did that all begin? And you know, how did you first become involved in this? And how did you meet a lot of the people who have become your primary clients?
Well, thanks, Bob, and I want to thank Jacob, too, and PARMA, because we've been very fortunate, our company, WhackBiz, to be associated with these guys and to also start to understand their art, their composition, their artists, and believe me, it's an illustrious group of people, and so thank you, and thank you to the New Hampshire Film Festival. WhackBiz started because of, I guess, where I began with Tony Bennett, and that was back right out of college in '88 and going in as a temp 5 years later and understanding, working with Scorsese on Goodfellas, seeing that Rags to Riches as an opening credit could actually garner at that time $30,000. I immediately, something triggered with me, and I said, this is a really fantastic thing. We worked with The Simpsons and Mac Groening. I saw many, many placements during that time period. I took a detour into representing producers and songwriters, hence working with Ital Shore, who wrote Smooth for Carlos Santana. We called Rob Thomas into the studio, and it was Ital's song. We did share the credit at the end, but just to set that record straight, because it's like a confusing story, but I did walk it into the office. I was in the studio for that, and that song has been in many, many films, and we've seen all the licenses came through my Warner Chappell publishing deal that I did for Ital. And that's when I started to see more and more every song Ital worked on with Jewel or Ricky Martin or Mark Anthony, and all the different artists that I work with, they ended up going into film. So in 2003, a year before iTunes started, I called my friend I went to high school with and said, let's digitize some of these catalogs. Let me start trying to hit the people that I have met during this time period and get these artists, a lot of them starving, a lot of them who couldn't get signed or arrested for the life of them, but were really good. And he was able to do that, and we were able to start moving ahead. So it has taken a good part of 9 years to get where I am today. Where I am today is working with amazing directors like Bruce Beresford. I recently did Peace, Love, and Misunderstanding with him, the Jane Fonda, Catherine Keener film, and worked extremely closely with him, and you know, answering to It's Not Over Till It's Over. 6 songs we had ended up being the turning point, a 4.5-minute song by Mika Pauly, a Boston artist, who, it was incredible, but fighting with the director, with the production company, who didn't want to pay for other things. Right now, it's everything from Tom, you know, I'm trying to think all of the films, from Jim Carrey and Ewan McGregor films to Kate Hudson films. Recently, A Little Bit of Heaven came out. And what I have here today, and it was last night, was Fairhaven, and we're fortunate to have Bonell Productions and Roger and Ellen here, who have Bonell and Too Human, and they have an opening piece in Fairhaven today. What I've embraced is an independent filmmaking community, because those are the directors you can get close to. I'm I do get the big Philip Seymour Hoffman's calling me. I do get these people on a one-off placement of a major song, but what I'm loving is taking independent artists and putting them together with independent filmmakers, budget-minded, keeping things low in cost, working on step deals, which we can talk about later, to be able to afford the filmmaker to use the music, and as they grow, we grow. They make money, we make money. You don't make money, we don't. You know, we're in it together. So hence, WAC-Biz stands for Writers, Artists, Composers Business. It's a cooperative of writers and artists and composers. And right now, we're 1,000 deep and growing, and not looking to grow too much broader, but that's the beginning of my time, and I'm continuing with major features with television. I just did a PBS documentary called Wham Bam Islam, which is an ITVS PBS release that I supervised. More and more that is growing, and it seems to me my love is independent musicians and composers and working with independent filmmakers to make it financially possible for the end result of the production. And I'm just thrilled to amass, as Mason has pointed out, sort of this community. We're all, you can't separate film and television, producers and directors and writers away from these artists and composers. We couldn't, the audio and the visual are a hand component. That they don't work without each other, and they never will. And I'm thankful that won't change. So.
Well, this hand in ham thing sounds appetizing, but I think I think
Yeah, sorry.
I'm wondering if you know of any have you seen any particular trends as of late, musically speaking, in terms of styles and genres that have surprised you, that come a little bit out of the blue, that you didn't expect?
Well, I was just in Los Angeles for 3 weeks, and I was absolutely baffled that the first thing was Fox Searchlight called me, and they were doing, we're finishing an Alfred Hitchcock feature. Do you have 1952 big band swing? And they're getting into period, and they're very hung up on the period. But they weren't so fussy. Their budgets were low. It's Fox Searchlight. They're the baby, underpaid section. Then I go over to meet with Art Ford, who's a very old friend of mine, on a Harrison Ford baseball film, which was 32 to 1945. Same situation. What I kept finding was, what I found was a trend of vintage recordings. What I also had, all of a sudden, was somebody call me out of the blue, which I called back immediately, saying, we bought a radio station in New York, 30s, 40s, 50s, Glenn Miller and Bing Crosby, and radio recordings. We digitized it. Took us 15 years. I go, okay, good, bring it on. So this is what I do. I amass these collections, and right now I sit between publishers, because you have to clearance those writers, of course, and make sure they're covered. But the masters, are accessible, and also we do have composers we can call on, as all of you guys can compose, anything that sounds like the Glenn Miller Orchestra, synthetically or not. So this has been a trend. The other trend is in Hollywood, particularly, and also particularly in broadcast for CBS, NBC, and those guys. They don't want AFM recordings. They want what PARMA will give us. They want orchestral compositions and recordings, masters, that are not involved with the AFM, because they charge triple scale. They're not interested in it. And I right now, Fairhaven, the film that's here, is going to Stars this morning. They're hung up. I mean, I'm signing off all these waivers on. This was not an AFM recording. This came out of a home studio in Queens. I mean, they don't understand. They have to understand. So the trend is money, budgets. Things are going right to video on demand. The filmmakers right now might not see a lot of money. So therefore, we as musicians and as companies are not seeing that much money. So that's a trend. And creatively, I'm finding that vintage, retro, that's been a trend. But then again, you could turn around, they want a contemporary piece. The next film that Tom O'Brien is doing is called Manhattan Romance, and it takes place right in Manhattan, and he wants Brooklyn bands, 2012. So this is how it goes. So the trends are interesting, but they're ones of deep financial concern, I think, more than anything that I'm feeling, because we handle music supervising as well as the administrative licenses, like Jacob does, to see the end result of the master and synchronization license. What are they adding up to? And what are we going to be left with financially? So that would be my trend I see.
That's very interesting. Now Jake, you started off as a drummer, so you've been hanging around musicians and people of talent for quite some time. Not that you yourself are one of those, but that's okay. But it's interesting, because I think that we grew up in the same basic geographic area, and a lot of talent in the greater Boston area. And I think you and I, like a lot of other people, started off by wanting to perform and to get out there and to make some music. But yet you ended up studying music supervision. You ended up dealing very deeply in contractual work, which is messy and not always creative. But you've also tried to balance it with a little bit of the more creative side and custom audio and all the rest that we do. Again, would you mind talking a little bit about how you arrived at what would be a more functional musical kind of career than maybe the rock and roll dreams of youth? Or?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like Bob said, I've been a musician my whole life. Started out as a percussionist and a pianist, and you know, growing up, did the whole gigging and touring circuit and played in a number of bands, both, you know, rock-based and in like a orchestral setting as well. But it was interesting growing up at a time period when I did, when, you know, I'm seeing the, you know, the major record labels crumble and really a seismic shift in the music industry. So from an early age, I knew I wanted a career in music, and I spent a lot of time determining what that was going to be. When I went to college, I studied a number of things and did a number of internships, and it seemed that my interest in film, which has always been a passion of mine, and television, and my interest in music could couple in the, you know, the area of synchronization. So after college, I got a degree in music business, and I just needed to get some experience doing music supervision. So I moved out to LA, of course, and I got a gig doing in-house supervision with Fox, particularly Fox Sports, Fuel TV, which is their extreme sport network, and also Fox Soccer Channel. So I was doing placement of a lot of indie bands, surf rock, lo-fi, Southern California type rock, as well as, you know, kind of action adventure music for Fox Soccer Channel. And it was a great experience. I learned a lot there, made a lot of connections there, and really saw firsthand how all this stuff went together in terms of clearances, working with artists, and all that stuff. Simultaneously, I was working from a production standpoint on Fuel TV's talk show, which was called The Daily Habit. So I was hanging in the green room with musicians and doing that whole thing, and it was a lot of fun. At a certain point, I decided I wanted to move back east, and so I came back east, and that's when I connected with Bob, who had been running PARMA Recordings, and we started PARMA Licensing, which is a music supervision company. We're also a licensing company that represents, like Suzanne, you know, a wide catalog of interesting music from indie artists and orchestral pieces, and really across the board. And simultaneously, we're a custom audio house, so we're doing everything from orchestral score to you know, production of indie rock music and dubstep music, really anything under the sun. So yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say that the trends in the industry really led me to this section of the market, just because publishing and licensing and synchronization is something that will always be around. And while we're seeing definitely trends and seismic shifts within that industry, it's definitely something that there's room for growth and room for a career. And, you know, growing up as an artist, of course, we have those rock and roll dreams, but you know, at a certain point, you have to find a steady career, and this has been a really interesting path to pursue.
You know, you work with a lot of independent filmmakers and a lot of guys who are in charge of music departments at large corporations, and a lot of other folks in, you know, across every spectrum. If you could grab one of them or any of them by the lapels and just say, "Oh my God, I wish you would just do this to make your own life easier," what would it be?
I mean, one of the big things is the industry waits and waits and waits to approach the subject of music when they're working on production. And, you know, that's when we run into these fire drill last-minute searches where they say, "Oh God, our editors temped in a Black Keys song and we need something that sounds like it." I would say, you know, the earlier you can start thinking about music when you're working on a production, even from, you know, the inception of the film, that it makes the whole process across the board much smoother, and you'll wind up with a product, finished product that you're happy with, because the music is integrated from an early standpoint, and you don't run into these situations where your project is cut specifically to music that now you have to replace, and it's never has, you know, the feeling that it originally did. So
that's interesting, especially when you're talking about something like larger ensemble, you know, acoustic instruments, orchestra. I mean, there's a lot more lead time that needs to go into a lot of this stuff, and it's not always easy. So yeah. Well, at this point, I think I'd like to open it up to you guys. I'm sure that there's a bunch of questions out there for the panelists. So, is there anybody here who would like to ask a question right now of our panel? Jason.
Yeah, I have a question, sort of directed towards Mason, but also it could be applicable to others. The question of temp music. Mason, I'm just wondering, in your experience, how often have you had the situation where the director puts in temp music and wants you to create something like the temp music, or how often have you had it where the director's just like, just go for it, I want to hear what you do? And then for everybody else, I'm just curious, like, you know, it seems to me that, like, I've had the experience more than once where there's temp music, and a project's come my way, and it's like, okay, here's the temp music, and so then I create this music, and then at the last minute they're like, no, actually, we got the rights to use the temp music. And I'm just wondering how often that happens, because it's happened a couple times.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
But Mason, I'm also curious about your experience about, do you like temp music, do you not, and how often
Yeah,
do you?
I asked, spoke at a film festival a few years ago with Carter Burwell, and he and I were talking. We went for about half an hour on the evils of temp music. I remember that. Well, I'll tell you, one day I got a phone call about 6-7 years ago from Sony ATV, and they said, listen, we got a funny situation here. We need to license a piece of your music. I'd done a movie with Don Roos called The Opposite of Sex. Pretty good movie. Very funny, saucy comedy. And he said, we're doing a movie. Nancy Myers is directing this movie called As Good as It Gets. No, that wasn't it. They're all the 70s James Brooks movies. He'd written this script. Something's Gotta Give. Something's Gotta Give, with Jack Nicholson and Diane Keaton. He said, and there's a scene in it, this guy goes on the phone, I had no idea who I was talking to, and he said there's a scene in it that's a montage in the middle of the movie, and she cut it, the editor really likes your score. At that time, I'd done a samba score for this movie, Opposite Sex, and it had become popular among editors, and they were using it as temp music. This is the only single time that temp music ever benefited me, is where this poor story's going. And he said, and Hans Zimmer's doing the score, and he keeps doing stuff, and she keeps saying no. So Hans got pissed off at her and said, well, if you like it that much, why don't you just go get it? So we're going to. He said, we'd like to borrow your cue from Opposite of Sex and use it in this scene. And As Good as It Gets, was that what? Something's Gotta Give. And I said, well, he said, as a matter of fact, he said, we technically don't need your permission because we, Sony, are doing the new movie and we did the old movie. So this is just kind of, but we'll give you some money. I said, okay, well, tell me at what point I say yes and sign on the dotted line. I said, but this is kind of a slippery slope, if you don't mind me saying so. I mean, if we're just going to start using music from old movies and new movies, pretty soon, why bother to write anything new? We just go back, and there's been, ever since sound, since the jazz singer, there's been quite a few scores. We can just use those. And with Pro Tools and Deep Digital Performer, the editing capabilities are pretty good. We can stretch music. We can pretty much do anything we want. As a composer, temp music's a problem because it involves a thing called demo love, which is the first thing you hear that works is the last thing you want to hear. And John Sayles doesn't temp. The Coen brothers don't temp. Matt Williams, one of my favorite directors, did not temp. Wes Craven temped. Peter Yates didn't temp. So my favorite directors, for the most part, don't temp. But everybody else does. And the reason they do is because the editors. Here's the thing: composers get to see a movie for the first time. The director never gets to see his own movie for the first time. He creates it, and frankly, they're bored out of their mind with their own films. By the time they get around to you, they're bored. I mean, they've just seen it. There's an old joke about a director who's in an editing room at 2 in the morning, and the phone rings as a friend of his. He says, "What are you doing?" I says, "Well, I'm here working on the film." The guy says, "Oh yeah, how's it going?" He says, "I have no idea. I'm here alone." And that's true. They really don't know. William Goldman, the greatest screenplay writer in Hollywood, his most famous saying was, "Nobody knows anything about Hollywood," and they don't. People don't know if their movie's any good. They only believe it, and they lose sight of it. I'm going to swear now. Can I swear?
Go right ahead.
Okay. There's a phrase called frame fucking. And frame fucking is the point at which a movie no longer gets better, it just gets different. And I started out as an editor pulling sync. And in the old days, in the Pleistocene era, when you wanted to take one frame out of a movie, you cut it. And then you cut out the adjoining dialogue track, and you put them in an envelope, and you labeled it, and you put it up on a board, and you had a room full of trims, called the trim room. It was a lot of work, and when you were done editing, you were really, really happy about that because it was so tedious. Now it's a video game. It's this. You used to send out a dissolve for 3 days to a lab and get it back. Now you do this. They can't stop. is my point. Filmmaking has changed to a point where it's ultimately a video game, and the director and the editor really don't, they get lost. There's so many possibilities, and they're so quick and easy that they get lost. The ability to demo to temp music is a way to hang your hat on something and say, Jesus, it finally works. You know, and it's a lot quicker than sending it to a composer and waiting for a few days for that composer to write music and send it back. They've got instant music. So they tend to fall in love. It finally does work, and they can stop working on the damn movie and actually enjoy that particular scene. And they fall in love with it familiar. And then you have to do the plagiarism waltzes where everybody recognizes the music except the lawyer or the guy that wrote it, you know? And it creates a dilemma for us. And there's nothing we can do about it. It comes in handy in the sense that when it works, we know the tempo and say, okay, fine, I don't have to worry about the tempo map. I know this one's going to work at 84 beats a minute to this point, and then it's going to go to 87 because that's what they cut. They cut it. I can, I got a click metronome. I can figure out the tempo of this piece of music, and that I can match. Though sometimes it's a good idea to throw that away too. The trick is to get the director to understand that this isn't their music, that they got to believe in you. You can do better than this. Otherwise, you're going to be bitterly disappointed because you're trying to create, and by the way, they usually pick music that involves at least 3,000 musicians, and, it's from Holt's The Planets, the largest single orchestra ever made. And by the way, you get 2 synthesizers and good freaking luck, okay? And that's a problem. I mean, a composer's expected on a vastly smaller budget to do something not just as good, but better.
But I think it also depends on the person, the director involved. Like, I had a situation where I was doing, for a couple of years, a bunch of spots for General Electric, and the creatives behind it, there was one guy who would send me this really cool temp music that I had no idea about, but that I loved, all kind of these obscure post-rock instrumental bands and stuff. And I would listen to this music and create something that had the same spirit behind it, but that wasn't really that music, but it had the same kind of feeling behind it. And he always could relate because it
Was he smart enough to know it worked?
Yes, and that was the thing. He understood my sensibility, and there was a natural chemistry that existed between us, such that like temp music actually, I loved the stuff I was coming up with, and I never would have come up with it if I hadn't had that temp music motivation.
Well,
but I think those relationships are rare. Probably.
Yeah, that involves a director who realizes that what he needs. Some directors, and I'm just going to talk. If you're TV, you work with a producer, but in features, you work with a director. But just saying interchangeable words for now. You've got to have someone who's smart enough to realize that he's just looking for music that accomplishes something. How it accomplishes it is your business. He needs something to play emotively for a particular character, or to energize a scene, or to lighten a scene up, or whatever it is. Communication between you and the director can, and I say he, but it could be she, pardon me. The question is what is going to get accomplished. How you skin that cat is up to you. Wrong directors I once had a director, heaven help me on that one, who said, I generally flunk everything the first time I hear it, you should just know. And I should have resigned then. I had to resign a few months later. It just was going to go south. And I thought, why give you the right music? Why not just write junk for a while, and then when you were done fooling around here, I'll write the real stuff, that was foolish. It's bad leadership. You need someone who believes in that. There are some directors that have actually something in their mind, and they just don't tell you. And so when you give them the wrong thing, there are an awful lot of notes out there, and a rather infinite combination of them, You don't happen to give them the right thing, it's tragic. And you're off, they go find someone else who, and then magically after 3 or 4 composers, whoever's standing in front of the guy when he's out of time and out of money is doing just the music he's looking for, But it's difficult to establish that relationship and say, look, John Sayles is the easiest because I know what he wants. Doesn't mean he doesn't flunk a piece of music every now and then. He once said to me, that's so nice, it's really going to bother me when I don't use it.
What about the first film you did with him? How was it then?
Pretty easy. Pretty easy because I got a lot of help because I hired, I'll tell you, he loves players. I love players, and I always get really good players. And that one was Guy Van Duzer, great guitar player, and I think Billy Novick and Bill Staines. I mean, I just had incredible musicians, each one for a different cue, and I accomplished what he wanted. He said, this one I need funny, this one I need energetic, you know, and I had no money. That always helps. Really, you do a better job if you got no money, you know. You've got nothing to waste. People's expectations are kind of slim, you know. I mean, and we're talking about Secaucus 7. I mean, I remember that music, and it got me a lot of work because people said, you did yodeling. Where'd you come up with yodeling? Well, I thought because I know a guy that yodels, and I didn't have any other ideas that day, you know. And you came up with a ukulele stride thing, and I thought, well, because guitar had been kind of overdone by then. I know because I did it, you know, and I got sick of hearing myself play, so I went and got Guy Van Duzer, who had a ukulele in the car, you know. I thought, hey, never heard that before, you know. And it's that newness. And I think sometimes if you've got a demo problem, here's a hot tip for composers. If you've got a demo love problem, just tell them, look, we've all heard this music before. Let me give you something you've never heard before. I remember a friend of ours, Jason Quigley here, asked me this question. A friend of ours, a guy named Duke Levine, who told me about the score for Napoleon Dynamite. Remember that movie? Mm-hmm. That's a Lowry organ with a rhythm master. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is the cheapest, simplest music, and it is fabulous. Mm-hmm. A, because I never heard it before, and B, it just ticks every box, every correct box there is. It fits that movie beautifully. My hat's off to her. I don't know the name of the composer, but my hat's off to him because it's so cool. And but you know, he probably didn't tempt it with Shostakovich, you know. But whatever he tempted with, if he did tempt it with, it sure as hell wasn't what he got, because I never heard anything like what he got. So my answer is, if you're having a demo love problem, is to say, you know what does this music accomplish for you? Let me go accomplish this with something you and I have never heard before. Then your only problem is going up and coming up with something you and I have never heard before. But that's our job.
What about the rest of you? The second part of the question about how often does temp music get chosen in the end by people?
Well, it's usually a budget thing, and so if they come to you with a Beyonce track, which just happened recently, it'll get knocked out. And I think, you know, what I can say to composers, archive, you know, database, and keep track of everything you've written, particularly that wasn't a work for hire, that's clear, that's instant. So we don't get demo love, or when something's temped in, it's usable. You temp in something of yours, take it, because the sync and the master is cleared. And that's the business that I'm in, I believe PARMA's in. You know, you send them something and they can keep it. So I'm finding more and more the temp is mostly a rule of thumb as to what we're trying to replace, and we've been pretty successful at it. I mean, I have to say, I have a pretty good understanding of where I can go for hip-hop, or where I can go for jazz, or for a scene in a Panama cafe. I mean, we all, and Parma is like this as well. So I think more and more today, particularly with budgets being so tight, that it's not, even composers, unfortunately, you know, the Zimmers and the Howard Shores, these people, and I've had these discussions at Sony Pictures. I mean, you know, call me, contact me when you can't afford $1 million, and we have other composers, and we've got their archives where you can go in and just take these beautiful recordings, and guess what? It took them quite a few years, but they are calling, and Lionsgate is calling, and they're calling because of this situation, you know, unfortunately, you know, that it does exist, it's budget, and I feel right now that it's a great time for composers that have archive, that I can actually put it together, that we can present something the first time, and if they want it, they can have it because it's clear. So I think it's an interesting time as well.
You know, I really liked your comment about telling a director, producer, you know, yes, we've heard that before, you've heard it before, let's give you something new. And I mean, this is something we encounter every single day. I mean, we've all heard the Adagio for strings, you know, I mean, you go watch, I remember I was watching, you know, Revenge of the Sith with, you know, the whole Star Wars film, the guitar player in my group, and we sat there and we're watching the whole montage of the Jedi getting slaughtered, and he looked at me and said, take, and it was just a rehashing of that same music over and over again. So I think that's really, really profound and good advice. But, you know, I mean, how about you, Jake? You see temp love and demo love all the time.
Oh yeah, I mean, as a guy representing a bunch of music, I like to play Cupid for demo love sometimes, because I like to, you know, make that happen. But you know, to go back to the question, yeah, it happens all the time, and like Suzanne said, it really depends on how extensive the budget is. You know, we can throw a bunch of tracks at a wall, you know, for a long period of time, but if it's not clicking with the producer and the director, then ultimately they might try to find some extra budget and make the clearance happen, depending on what the track is. But yeah, I do see it happen very often, as you said. It's just the way it goes sometimes. But budgets are finite, and a lot of times they can't make it happen. So it goes both ways.
Any questions from the audience? Anyone? You, the swarthy man with the hat.
This is kind of related to what you were just talking about, but I'm very fascinated by this line, and Mason, you alluded to it earlier, where the language of music, which is so codified and so uniform, meets the language of the non-musician, which is very subjective. And I'm curious about, you know, how much of what you do is interpreting that, and is there a codified, you know, non-musical language? When director A says I need it to be purple, and director B says I need it to be purple, do they mean the same thing, or is it very subjective for each different client that you work with?
It is subjective. It is, which is why you mentioned earlier the fact that you said quite wisely that everybody leaves it till the last minute. I mean, people do just simply leave music to the last minute because they can. And, you know, you're not about to turn work down because they didn't call you 2 months ago. The problem is you don't have a lot of time, and it's not just the time to write the music, it's the time to get to know the people. And that's really difficult. It's why there's so much frustration, I think, in the composition schedule. I think I like history. I think all of us are trying desperately to hit a curveball in life. That metaphor is wonderful. The only way to hit a curveball is to swing ahead of it, right? And that's why we have the phrase behind the curve, because most of us spend our life, behind the curve. The only way to get ahead of the curve is to really try to figure out where technology is going at this point, or popular taste, which is fine. And sometimes it goes retro, which is wonderful for those of us who remember how to do yesterday's music. But let me give you, the reason I mention this is because I can tell you one way the curve is going now. The curve is going toward digital projection in movie theaters, right? I mean, they're going to stop sending film real soon. Well, what does that mean? You know what it means? It means we used to have 2 months to do music for, when I started this, I would get films and I'd have 2 months. It's a long time. But this was also at a time when you would sit there on a piano with a director and you'd say, now the oboe's going to do this, and now the guitars are going to do this. Well, now you give it to them done on synthesizer modeling, every cue. And they have a pretty good idea what it's going to sound like, even if you have money for real musicians. And 9 out of 10 times they say, that sounds so good, just put that on the air, thank you, and that'll do it. And that's a way of saying that time frame has compressed to the point where now we have, I did a pretty big TV movie for Disney a few years ago about a Pennsylvania coal miners and disaster. And they wanted it on 6 months to the day after the disaster itself. Well, that's not a lot of time to make a pretty major motion picture, and they spent a lot of money on this movie. You have to write it, cast it, shoot it, it was something. And I ended up with 2.5 weeks for full orchestra. That's not a lot of time, because you got to write out all these parts and things like that. Well, they had to be done 3 days before air date. They were in sweeps. And now it would have to be done 3 hours before air date, because nobody's going to take the time to make a print. What I'm saying is, because we're projecting everything out digitally and hitting basically pretty soon it'll be stable enough. Now they send people a hard drive, I believe, but pretty soon they're just going to beam it off satellites. What they're going to do is they're going to finish a movie about 5 minutes before some kid sits down in the theater to see it. And let me tell you who's going to be the last guy showing up at that party. It's going to be the composer, okay? With a cut that they changed half an hour before the kids sit down to write the music, because people can't stop editing. They're compressing the time. that we have. I did a TV series for Warner Brothers for wonderful producers. I had no beef with working with these people. They did Nip Tuck and The Closer. They're real smart people. About 3 years ago, and I never set foot in L.A. I did it from Topsfield, Massachusetts, where I was living at the time, and they would just beam me a QuickTime movie, and I'd get a few guys. I did it with real players. I'd get a few guys in the studio, and off we would go, and I'd mix it up and beam it up to a satellite, down to the mix it on the air the next day. I mean, in every week in, week out, have a lot of music for 1 hour episodes, and it can be done. The problem is we don't have time to meet them. We got no time to get there. These were producers I knew well. I had done a TV movie with them and stuff, and so I knew what they meant when they said it. So maybe what this way of answering your question is, maybe it means when you have repeat clients, people you do know, we're going to know when they mean purple, what shade of purple they mean. But I think in this gotta have a gimmick world, it's going to be hard to establish that kind of communication, and the end result is going to be a lack of quality. It's going to be a homogenization. We're going to fall back on the familiar because it's safe, and you know, don't forget there's got to be something there. We need some kind of music. That's an advantage of sound design as opposed to music composition. I like sound design, by the way. I think that guy from Red Hot Chili Peppers is pretty good. You know, the guy that does Sonnenberg movies. He's very good. But so sometimes sound design's good, but it's awfully easy to make that kind of noise work behind scenes. It gets boring after a while, and it's not very emotive. But it can be scary, and it can be better than nothing. That's the problem. We're going to see music become better than nothing. That's not, in my opinion, an enviable place. That's the temptation when you don't have enough time to establish a relationship.
You know, you spoke a minute ago about the realm of possibility in financial terms. Sometimes when there's less money to play with, things are more effective. And I think you're saying the same thing in terms of technology too, which is that, you know, the more that's at one's disposal, maybe the less hard one works. And you think about Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and these guys having access to all the tools that we have today. What would they have done? I'm not sure if it would have been better. That's part of the issue.
When you're really, in post-psychedelic moments, don't you wonder how what Beethoven would like if he'd heard, even the song "Roll Over Beethoven." I mean, I'd really like to know what those guys would think. Although I was listening to a version of, I think it was the George Harrison tribute concert of "My Sweet Lord," where Prince, and I'm not a Prince fan, but Prince is playing guitar behind Clapton singing. Mm-hmm. It was fantastic, and I'm listening to the notes he's playing, I'm thinking, it's actually pretty complex music going on there. So I wondered how I made that leap. Mm-hmm. I wondered how those guys, the masters, would consider that, because sometimes modern pop music is pretty intense and pretty musical, and Zappa was, Captain Beefheart, these were guys back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s who were writing pretty complex pop music. So it can be. It's just that sometimes you get into sound design and it's just a bunch of samples played backwards. Yeah. And we think it's art.
I wanted to ask you guys something from a composer's standpoint, because yesterday in the distribution discussion, when films go right to VOD, video on demand, talking about compression, really technical compression, how do you think it's all going to sound at the end when everything's being digitally delivered? Like, what difference is it going to make spending time with the real players when everything is so compressed? I mean, do you fear for the destruction of the actual tracks and what the final audio result's going to be, just directly digital when we're not dealing with tape anymore? I mean,
Mason?
How's that going to sound?
That doesn't bother me. I got over that. It used to. When we went originally to digital sound, we were all using a thing called DA88s. You can't screw up in our business. You can't fail to deliver. So you need a stable format. If you have something that blows up, if you're a beta tester of a program, you're an idiot, because it's going to blow up in your face. And, the dog ate my cyber something. It doesn't work. Okay? So you got to deliver. So you need stable stuff. Stable gear, stable software. The problem is, as I was just listening, what is it, the 50th anniversary of CD, of the invention of CDs recently, or 25? Anyhow, 30, CD hit a birthday. And I do remember early CDs were horrible. Early digital music was horrible. A lot of it technically has to do with converters, analog to digital converters. And they've gotten so good, if you worry about that and you do it well, I'm no longer bothered by the prospect of digital music. And I just redid, I did music to Frontline at TV. I did the theme for it almost 30 years ago. And I just redid it last year because we needed new digital standards. So I had to re-record some of it, remix. It was a complex job. And I didn't want to lose sight of the original melodies. And I wondered what would happen in the changing of it. And it was kind of odd because there is one tape-based BSO recording of that music that's still in the credits. And people seem to prefer that. Let me say this. Here's a way of answering. Here's a way of answering that question. If you listen to contemporary country music, you will hear, listen closely to the next time you're on a country station, and maybe it's not a place you loiter, but let's just say it is. And listen to the piano tracks. What you're going to be hearing, I do believe, on literally every country hit today is a digital sampled grand piano. Now, if you go to Nashville and you go to the greatest studios there, in the corner, they will have a Yamaha C5. Yamaha C5 is a fabulous grand piano. I own one. And it's a baby grand, or a little bigger than that, actually. And it's it's the industry standard because it stays in tune and has a very bright sound. It's a fabulous piano. And all of these studios have them. And they're sitting in the corner gathering dust. Why are they gathering dust if they're sitting there and they have great piano players on these tracks? It's because we've gotten used to the sound of a digital piano. And producers who are producing these country hits realize that the use of a digital piano allows them more sonic space. They can put more things in the track because a real piano has more overtones and it just sucks up space. It's an aesthetic valuation, not an economic one. It has nothing to do with money or the ease of recording a digital piano at all. It's strictly aesthetic because we've gotten used to the sound. Now that's the tail wagging the dog. Because that digital piano is made by carefully sampling every note of a real piano. But we like the sampled version of the real thing. We really do. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just weird. And that's where we are. And that's my attempt to answer that question. It's not bad, but it is weird. Okay?
In the back.
My own theater experience, I feel like overcompression for loudness is the main thing that takes a toll on the whole audio, the dialogue as well as the music. Is that trend starting to back away now? I know in the music industry it kind of got up to a certain point and there was a lot of discussion about it and that every band was trying to have their record be louder than the one before and so forth.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, that's I was once in a lobby of a movie theater, and there were an elderly couple, and they were asking the usher what time the movie itself started, because they didn't want to go in and listen to the trailers, because the trailers are super compressed. Now, theatrical standards in a movie theater is, I could have this wrong, but I think it's 82 dB. In other words, when you go into a mixing studio in LA or New York, and you're mixing a theatrical feature, they don't turn the volume up and down in there. They have a standard of volume which is quite loud, and that is the theatrical standard because all movies are set. All movie theaters are set at this theatrical standard. The loudest sound can be 82 decibels, okay? Fairly loud. The problem is, in order to sell the product, the same thing happens in a movie trailer that happens in TV commercials. They're super compressed. They have gotten their compression tools and their music and everything down so that compression reduces the range, dynamic range. You have from loud to soft. It's here to here, right? The loudest being 82 decibels, softest being 10 decibels, okay? And then below that is just room noise. So 10. They take it, and here's the dynamic range of a movie trailer. It's 82 decibels to 80 decibels. I mean, it's really loud and really, really loud, okay? And these poor old people don't want to go in there and get hammered like they're getting mugged coming out of an alley, you know, by the trailers. They want to wait till they go to the movie. The movies have a dynamic range, largely for suspense reasons, so people can sit there and lull to sleep so they get slammed by, you know, what Wes Craven used to call a scare, which is a bang sound, okay? You have to have dynamics to have emotion. As Dan Hicks in his Hot Lick said, how can I miss you if you won't go away, okay? And you have to have that. So theoretically, and here's the other weirdness in the digital weirdness, is digital allows you a tremendous amount of dynamic range. Because of the digital age, we can have a much bigger dynamic range than we could have in analog. We have no hiss. We have no tape noise. So we can have we can hear a pin drop in a room followed by, you know, the 417 from the Santa Fe Railroad go by 3 feet from our ear. We can have this enormous digital range. Why then do we abandon all that and use it only, as I say, loud to really, really, really loud, this tiny range? It's an oddity of the new digital age. And super compression, because we have the tools to make everything really loud. Everything really loud. It's a damn shame, and there apparently is always a thing on Congress where people swear they're going to have, the AARP really is one of the moving parties here. They swear they're going to have Congress enact a law which prohibits TV commercials from being as loud as they are. Because the TV commercials are really, really, really loud, then you go to the show, and it backs off. I'll believe that when I see it, because that's the economic driving force of our commercial television. And I do think if you want to see the best possible dynamic range in the digital age, you go, once again, to the best programming. You know, you go to cable. And there you will see it pretty well done. Their engineers seem to be better. I did HBO films. They seem to come out sounding pretty good. When I did ABC films, they didn't. I'm not sure why. But then again, their programming's better over there. Everybody smart's working on cable. I don't get it, you know. But that seemed to be, once again, I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's weird, you know.
Now, Jake, you spend a ton of time, obviously, working with orchestral ensembles, recordings from scratch, mastering, mixing, editing, the whole bit. And then also trying to fulfill a double function of having that stuff be optimized for use in media, which you obviously work with Suzanne on. You know, what are you seeing as far as that exact same trend in terms of orchestral music? Because what we're talking about here is, you know, very much the simulated versus the real, and what's preferable and what is not, and what are the possibilities. So what are you seeing in that, and what's it like in your day-to-day life?
Sure. I mean, there's this major trend in the industry regarding, you know, organic orchestral recording versus synthesized. And as far as television goes, it's primarily going to synth, and everyone's looking for that. And I've had a number of conversations where, you know, because of our functions, we're always trying to sway people in the direction of doing an organic orchestral recording. There's nothing that simulates real musicians behind real strings producing real material. And, you know, I mean, like Mason was saying earlier, budgets are budgets, and ultimately it's going to default to synth recordings a variety of the time. So, you know, it's something that's definitely we're seeing more and more of. And when budgets are there, people do tend to go for it. But it's easier to do synth. People can produce it in their basement. And so it's something I'm seeing a lot of in the industry right now is the digital age is you know.
Yeah, Suzanne, please.
And the trend, and I'm sure that you guys are seeing this, is that ESPN, CBS, and all of them, they're amassing libraries, and they're buying these. So when you go to them, like companies like ourselves go to them, you know, they even NBC. I was working with Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy has a new show. It's not very good, but he's got a new show, and he wanted me to come in to supervise, and NBC shuts companies like us down saying, well, we have this really crappy, database of stuff we have to use. And so hence that kind of cuts us out a bit. But further to that trend, A&E, and speaking to cable, when I was out in LA, Renee Zellweger is executive producing Laurel Canyon, and the call, and I'm friends with the supervisor, is for 1972 Sunset Boulevard guitars, real rip rocking, and that to me is exciting. Cable's exciting, and what we're seeing is the film people, are now going to television. I mean, television's paying them more money, so we have to pay attention to the trends in television, and we have to be thankful for HBO, A&E, Bravo, and these kind of outlets that do regard the music and still want to pay for it, and so there's a lot of things going on, including those libraries that we get cut out of. So
it's so true about the libraries too. When I was working at Fox, they also were developing their own in-house library, and the protocol was, when we were temping a show, you go first to the music that was completely theirs, and you had to find something out of there. And if we couldn't, then we would explore other options. But the networks are smartening up, and they're realizing that they can buy property that they can further monetize, not on their own networks, but on other networks as well. So Fox was promoting their own library to Viacom and all these other networks, and they're making some money off of it. So it's an interesting thing that we're seeing in the industry right now.
Question over here.
This sort of follows up with that, because everything we're talking about so far has to do with, and this is a question for the licensing people mostly, licensing music for television or film, and there's also internet and radio.
Yeah.
I read an article last week about a store somewhere in Europe. I can't remember exactly. It might have been England or something, but they're designing the store. They have designed it where when you walk by the window of the store, there's some type of music that plays as you walk by, but it's some sort of atmospheric whatever. And I'm just wondering, how tapped into other licensing opportunities are you guys, beyond the ones that we know of? Music is becoming such a thing in all facets of life, and we've got the window playing the music, and any other number of things, that you hear music. Are there growing opportunities for music to be placed in other situations? Have you guys tapped into that at all? Or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there, across the board, especially, with cell phone apps and all these things, there, are a lot of in-store opportunities for licensing. Even, things you don't necessarily think about, like airlines, all the music that you hear when you plug in your headphones on the airline, that's all licensed material. It's really,
games, and there's web. I mean, I just did a huge Adobe campaign. It was all web. It was a lot of money. They took OK Go. Here we go again, and it was exciting. And it absolutely, with technology the way it is, everywhere you go, you're hearing music stream. I had a really big meeting recently with a German company called Innova Media that all they do is train stations across Europe and Bangladesh to Shanghai. And when you go into the train station, you hear a stream of music and media. You go on the trains and you see the news streaming and you hear music streaming. Interesting, the New York market, the New York, New Jersey Port Authority won't allow them to do the music because from a security, Homeland Security standpoint, that's been cut out. But exactly what you're saying, everywhere you're going, and I'm taking meetings, which in turn will bring PARMA in. I mean, we're taking meetings and trying to get worldwide in any kind of outlet like that. I mean, and we do have to look at those trends. I mean, a trend I saw, I just saw a new film, I'm trying to remember the name of it, from last weekend in Burlington, Vermont, but the kid next to me was Shazamming. I don't have an iPhone, I have an Android. Shazamming every hip-hop music cue. I watched him. He held it up to the screen, Shazammed it, went to iTunes, was downloading it, just like this. And it was an unbelievable, the trend of I want it now is an amazing thing. I have to thank Mark Dole. I work with the Dropkick Murphys because of Mark Dole. He was producing a campaign for an in-store for Timberland. They couldn't afford it. It was a lot of money they wanted, and the manager calls me up, and next minute I'm in Los Angeles, and now I have the Dropkick Murphys and working with Sons of Anarchy, and like that backfired to benefit people like myself. There are just an enormous amount of opportunities, virtual things that don't even exist right now. They're just going to continue growing, and it's an amazing technology world that we live in right now. So
I do think there's some type of growing disconnect, though, in the licensing world, specifically in film, because if you think about in the old classical world, you had the court composers. I mean, Handel had to write a new piece, a new symphony every week, and let's use the one that I did last week. No, a new one. But that was the economic model, and I think in recent years, what's obviously happened is that in the last 20 years, people are so hip to the fact that this is how bands are going to make money because they're labels aren't signing acts like they were before. Touring is more difficult, merchandise is more difficult. So this is a much more automatic route to making money. But I have seen that that's led to a disconnect where filmmakers want it cheaper, let's say, or there's a lot more competition for the bigger gigs. One call for one piece is going to generate, you guys know, tens of thousands of submissions. And then on the other side of it, I think that there's not necessarily a full and complete knowledge from the filmmaking side of saying, well, these guys are looking at me as being someone who can provide for them because there are no other economic models that are really working in the music industry as a whole. So there is a little bit, I think, of a disconnect there because people are honing in right in on the sweet spot where the biggest money is, but it's also becoming more and more complex because I think there's so much competition at this point in terms of getting those placements and getting those spots, as I think you guys all know. That the newer stuff that you just described, which is fascinating, the idea of walking by a window and having some personalized piece of music playing for you, a musical portraiture or whatever, these are other usages which will be monetized in time, but there'll be a lag. Again, it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's a mess because everyone's scrambling for a smaller and smaller piece of the pie, and I think it is a challenge. And I think partly, the point of doing this is to have a dialogue so that both musicians and filmmakers are cognizant of all of the realities of what's going on in terms of situations like this. And I think some of your stories and tales about the difficulty of getting the music done on time, not even necessarily finding a right fit for a licensing placement, but actually having that creative element have to do with the timeline. These are very complex issues that not everybody is sensitive to. So.
It's an organic world we live in, really. It's about relationships, and the New Hampshire Film Festival, festivals in general are really important. It's like your relationship with John Sayles. If you don't have those relationships, that's where they begin. Directors, hands down, will have friends that they'll bring in over top of everything. So I think, enjoy these festivals, meet the producers, the distributors, the filmmakers, the directors, the writers. The writers, I love screenwriters because they'll write in this scene, a Bob Dylan piece is, soaring over, she falls off the cliff. You get it from the very beginning, So I think that we can be discouraged, but we can also embrace the organic nature of festivals and just the human nature of relationships. And as he and I travel all the time to meet with companies, to meet with filmmakers and studios, you have to keep doing that. And I think being here today at the festival is a really important step into keeping those relationships going.
Any other questions from the audience?
From a licensing standpoint, well, first on the composing thing, the last 3 films I've done, we've actually brought the composer to the set and just noodled around with things. And we started film on August 16th, and it was edited by September 30th. And it was a pretty great film, and the music was basically done as we were shooting everything, and it was this great organic piece. But my question is more about the licensing stuff. So we knew a bunch of the bands that we wanted to get their music from and everything, and we went and we negotiated festival rights, and then now we're talking all this step-up stuff. Does everybody come at you for the licensing stuff and go, I just want festival rights and we'll deal with everything else later? Or do you go, no, we're going to get all that stuff signed off right now so you're not coming in when you have a distribution deal and trying to get those songs cheaper or whatever?
Yeah, when I'm supervising a project, I always recommend to, if possible, take care of everything up front. That way you don't hit that wall where you finish your festival run and more opportunity arises, and then you have to worry about pulling pieces because people don't want to be a part of it moving forward and all that. If you can take care of as many rights as possible up front, you don't run the risk of having to pull music or having to renegotiate or shell out a lot more money when that time comes.
Well, how many steps are there now?
We have to look at it right across the board, as Jake's saying. And I would say 100% of the time as a filmmaker, you should copy that all down. It goes financially. Financially, it's usually in 3 steps beyond. Festival rights are one thing. Then the next step is when it's sold. The first hit of money comes in, you get a very small amount. And then when it hits the first $1 million, then it goes 5, then it goes 10. And so, what I would recommend is understanding the long-term thing, because you're at a festival, why? Because you want to sell your film, you want distribution, you want to get it picked up. But also, I think as a producer, a director, and a studio, you also have to explain to the musicians, it might go to video on demand. I mean, which, I was telling, the head of BMG Publishing, that's kind of promo going to Stars. He's like, promo? What do you mean promo? Stars are going to owe us money. And I go, it's 8 cents a download. It's 8 cents a download. Like, why does the filmmaker have to pay you more money? So, I mean, my simple thing is you have to cover all those stages and steps, and that is the trend, and that's the only way a lot of people can get films made today, or documentaries particularly. That's another.
Can I just ask you, if you tie, just
yes.
to translate, I think what you're saying, and ask you a further question. If you're tying, I used to be a lawyer. And still think like that sometimes. If you're tying the use of a film, just let's say you're dealing with one person that wrote it and recorded it, so you got a single source. You go to him and say, I want master and sync rights, and I need these rights. First of all, and by the way, one thing I would say as a lawyer is contract for everything, but contract for everything with individual payments, because you could get to a we have a bad word in my composer business. It's called rescore.
Mm-hmm.
You could get to a festival, sell your film, and they say, by the way, you got to rescore it.
Right.
We don't like the music, and then you don't want to have to pay somebody for the rights if it goes into a distribution deal, and that song is no longer in the film. Even though, so what you want to do is contract it up front, but with step payments. And when you say you tie it to money, are you suggesting it gets tied to the gross of the film? And if so, who reports that gross? What's it? I'm just curious as to the definition.
Well, it is tied to the gross of the film, and I have to say, unfortunately, where I'm sitting right now, I haven't seen anything make from a full contract that I have done. But it is my job signing off on this music to keep in touch, and to keep in touch with the production company. I mean, I know very well with Fairhaven, like what they have and haven't made, and because I represent the artist, and it's to my best interest. Yeah, and you can also track it pretty easily. Whether you're looking at IMDb Pro, or you're looking at any of the source material that comes out of Hollywood, you can, and the Hollywood Reporter. But right now I'm not in the position to say they're lying or they're not. We'll get to all of that, and it's Hollywood accounting, and it's very sketchy at best. Right. So I mean, I understand from a legal standpoint, but from BMG, from EMI, from Warner Chappell, what we're seeing, and I see their term deals on the synchronization. I might handle the master. I'll get the sync deals coming in from the major publishers, and they're looking at $1 and $3 and $5 million steps. That's what they're looking. They're looking festival 1, 3, 5, and that's just the way it's going. And it's when you're dealing like we are with a sync and master rights in hand in a one-stop shop, that's the trend too, because we can speak for these tracks, we can keep track of it, and I'm sure it's going to be problematic from a legal standpoint and from a transparent, honest standpoint financially. But right now, are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A follow-up to that is, so we're doing steps based on video on demand, cable, and theatrical release. So those are the steps that we're following, not monetary steps.
Okay.
So have you dealt with that before? Because I think that's the new way of it going. Because we shot a feature for $20,000,
right?
And sync rights are 30 on one of the songs. So when we hit that first step, we're still all trying to get paid back.
$30,000
for one of the songs. Yeah. But not one of the songs we ended up using.
Yeah.
But when we were temping in some of the stuff.
Right.
I'm an editor. I temp in stuff. I'm sorry.
Right.
I have to do it.
Yeah.
And there's a song that I temped in of Bob's years ago that I never found its equal, and it was just like, that's gonna be the song.
Right.
So yeah.
Thank you.
But don't be afraid of I mean, that's an interesting point, Mark, about how you're seeing the trends. And I think that will change to that, because we're not going to be seeing $5 million on an indie film that's going right to Stars or Netflix. We're not going to see that. So I think that's a very interesting point that you've brought up to take a look at. And I would, I'd also say be realistic if you're a filmmaker and trying to find things that will economically fit in. And also don't be afraid. I mean, I was trying to get Somewhere Over the Rainbow for a Philip Seymour Hoffman film, but it was me. No, actually, I got $2,500 on the publishing side from his son. So I
Harold Arlen?
Yeah, but from Arlen's son. Yeah, so, but and then they ended up not using it. I'm like, you guys, I bent over backwards trying to get this
Really?
cleared for you, and
How'd you go straight to his son? You didn't
I
go,
just-
who's the publisher on that?
I don't know if it was EMI or Warner Chappell. This is about 2 years ago. It was on Jack Goes Boating, and but it was one of these things. Don't be afraid, because sometimes his son Sam, Harold's son, might just want further exposure. And it gets used all the time. I mean, this song gets used a lot. But I would say, be realistic. 30,000. I'd be like, okay, I'm going to go on to something else. And also don't be afraid to approach a publisher. If you BMI, ASCAP, and CSAC all have databases, you can go in as a filmmaker. Whoops, and find, and most certainly find who the publishing company is, who the administrative representative is, and put a phone call in. Hey, I'm an independent filmmaker. I really want this song. It's perfect in my opening title, and this is what I want. And you might be extremely surprised. And that's what I'm finding is that, when it's a smaller company like myself, if I ask, it's very different than Lionsgate calling up and asking.
Sure.
It's very different.
I've seen the same thing. I supervise a series of these snowboard films, and every time a film is wrapped, the director will send me a cue sheet of stuff that's already in the film. And every time I see these cue sheets, I'm like, oh, God. So I'm going through, and there's, the Ramones, and there's Kid Cudi, and all these giant artists. And I'm like, okay. But for the most part, we're able to clear these things because of the scope of the film, the nature of the rights that we're requesting. It's a lot of these things are not unattainable if they're framed correctly, and you kind of paint a word picture as to how it's going to be used and all that. So, yeah, I would definitely say you don't have to be afraid of going after major clearances. It's it can certainly happen within budget depending on what the project is.
I just have a question about Los Angeles. I have a friend who's a pretty successful composer, Mark Snow, and he, for years, would have a place in LA and a place on the East Coast, and he would spend 6 months out there while he was working on a show, and then he'd be back on the East Coast. And you all don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but none of your permanent residences is in Los Angeles. And I'm just wondering, did you all spend time there? How much time do you spend there now? How important is it to spend time there? And what is your relationship with that town? Because it just seems like a lot of the people I know who are in the business are there. And even though we live in an age where the internet, you can send stuff all over the place, it's still like, being in a certain place counts for something in the business. So I'm just wondering, thoughts on that?
You were in the mouth of the lion for quite some time, yes? Mason?
Oh, me, yeah. I think it's actually pretty important. I had 4 homes there, owned my last one. I kept duplicate studios. I mean, my family was here in the North Shore of Boston, and I would go back and forth. And back then it was hardware-based synths and things like that, and I had duplicate studios. So all I had to do was bring software back and forth, and I could write equally in both coasts. LA is a horizontal town. New York's a vertical town. You can do business in New York with somebody who's literally half a mile away and never meet them. You just do it on the phone. In Los Angeles, you get in a car and you drive over there and you sit down and you look them in the eye. One, there's parking. And there might be a lot of traffic, but that's because there's parking. And you have you really, it's a person-to-person town, I think. And I think it's pretty important to have a presence there and spend a lot of time there. You would think it's not, because, as you said, you can do the work from anywhere. But you got to get the work. And to get the work, and sometimes I would have people say, well, no, I got to have you here doing it. I'm thinking, you're doing the director, you're doing post-production, you're doing looping, you're not going to have any time to come visit me. And they didn't. They wanted to know they could. And it became an emotional thing.
It's being on people's radar, and I agree. I mean, I just came back from 3 weeks there, and it's all about, like, trying to talk to them. It's one thing, trying to get them on the phone. But the minute you go, oh, I'm in town, I'm here till, like, the 20th of September. Oh, great, can you come out on Thursday? And what I find as a music supervisor is you miss opportunities. I mean, I get invited to screenings, especially during pilot season. There's so many things that, it's, my lifeline are people like Gary Calamar for True Blood, and people that I work, sort of very, remotely through these people. So unless you can work remotely through somebody, have representatives on the ground there, and be in the faces from a supervisory licensing perspective, it's really tough. And I myself have been thinking that, like, I should be out there at least, 3 weeks a quarter of this year, because you do need to build those relationships, and you miss just those things, the screenings at 7 o'clock over at CBS on a Friday night, and you're not there, you miss that, and all those supervisors are in the room vying for that same thing, Luckily they come back to me. I'll be working, with a lot of different supervisors on things, but I'd say it's important. That's a general point.
Absolutely. I mean, oh, sorry. I mean, it is a relationship-driven business, like we said. And a lot of that, though it's, it's a virtual industry and, the work can be done coast to coast, it's all about trust, and these producers and directors want to work with people that they have seen in the flesh and can trust and that they know will deliver. And so being out there and sitting down with them and buying them lunch is a very important part of what we do. And, I try to get there as often as I can.
Any other questions? Actually, Mark, to go back to what you were talking about in terms of the, a fee that was proposed to you for a piece of music. I mean, I think following up with these guys, like those types of relationships, I mean, how many times have we all said, all right, well, we'll do a gig for a couple bucks less, or because we know somebody really well, they say, all right, sure, we'll use your stuff or whatnot. And I guess a question for you would be, how many times, in what specific times that are notable, have you deviated from what you had as a self-imposed type of line of demarcation? Is I will do this, I won't do this, whether it's financial or artistic. And in those terms, how often have you just been pulled a little bit off your mark because you wanted to, or you allowed it to happen, not creatively, but in terms of maybe doing a gig that you might not have expected to do?
We're talking primarily financial?
Artistic, financial, both.
Well, every time I went off the mark artistically for financial reasons, I thought, hey, this is an easy buck. It didn't work out. I just didn't do a good job, or I got fired, I was miserable, you name it. It turns out if you really just want money, you really ought to rob banks. Computer fraud, maybe. But you can, but you can take unusual jobs that will seem humdrum or something if you think you can put a new spin on it. Or you think that people, a lot of it's about the people. If you think the people are great, why wouldn't you? I mean, listen, the whole trick in LA, as I said, it's piece and people want to work with people they like. There's everybody there. There's a million of everything there. They can always find somebody to do the job you can do. The question is, would they rather be in a room with you? Would you rather be in a room with them? Assuming you can pick and choose your work, which sometimes you can. And so it becomes about the people you're working with more than the aesthetic or financial concerns, I think. You can usually find a way to make a living on even the cheapest of budgets, because if you're working with people who are any good, you just say, look, I can't afford to do this. And they'll say, well, what do you need? Really? I mean, I get that. Everybody's cheap. You're expected to work cheaply. That's just the way it is. And we all know this, and we say, okay. But they understand you have to make a living. That's not that bad. If you really think you're going to phone it in, you're going to get in trouble. I had to learn that the hard way. I mean, I just got into a couple of jobs that I thought were pretty easy, and I did a good job, and it just didn't work for reasons. And I realized, well, I was writing yesterday's news. It was pretty good, the music, but somebody saw something wrong there, and they were probably right. So it's more about the people.
Thanks. Well, I think in closing, we have a good group of folks here, and thank you all for coming. But I'd also like to think about the people that might be watching this on video afterwards. So thinking about this festival, and again, it's kind of interesting. We're in a place that not a lot of people identify necessarily with the saturation of film and music and art. But I think this is a wonderful event, and clearly there's a ton of talented people here. So for all the people who are not physically present, just let's go down the panel, and we'll start with you, Jake, at the very end. You know, if you could offer some advice to filmmakers who are encountering problems or want to know a little bit more about the usage of music in film and how to work with a composer and what purple means, what would you advise and where would you advise them to go?
I mean, there are certainly resources, you know, and if this, obviously, as much research as you can do should be done, but people like Suzanne and myself and Mason, you know, we're here and we're actively working in the industry and acting as that liaison between, you know, music and creatives, and so seek out as much, you know, help as you can get. You know, this is what we do, and this is what our function is, and this is what we love to do. So.
And how can they reach you if they want to find you?
Carrier pigeon?
Carrier pigeon, yeah. No, yeah. Here at Parma, I can be reached, you know, always by email, always by phone. Are we giving out contact information? Okay.
I demand it.
Yes.
Okay.
I am paying your salary. I just want to reiterate that. Yes.
I can be reached at jacob.weinreb, Weinreb, at PARMA Licensing, PARMALICENSING.com.
A drummer who can spell. Outstanding. Okay. Suzanne.
I ditto what Jacob has said, and just don't be afraid. Go ahead creatively. Just, you know, move ahead creatively first and foremost. Don't give up the dream of what you see, and know that anything's possible, particularly with companies like ourselves. I mean, you'll be able to get that in place. You can reach me, wacbiz@gmail, WACBIZ@gmail. Check us out at wacbiz.com, and it's all very clear. Everything's there, and all our contact information is there. And just keep up the dream of filmmaking. It's really important.
It's true. Magic can happen, and the worst you're going to hear is the word no. And that's not so bad. So, Mason?
I can be reached at, you can Google me. Spell the way it sounds, my name. Then there's a website, masondaring.com. Suzanne said an interesting thing, which I hadn't thought of, which was a good way to get information is film festivals. I mean, we're at one right now, and people are getting information theoretically as I speak. But really, I speak at film festivals a few times a year, kind of around the world, actually. And there really are. There are more and more of them, and they're really pretty great place to network, because usually pretty smart people go to them, I find, and there's a lot of question and answering. It requires less filtering. I think they're a pretty cool place to hang around.
Great. Well, thanks a lot for coming, and enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you.